Well, it is Wednesday, April 14th, our fifth week of sheltering in place, and our fourth opportunity to share some of our own experiences, reflecting on the Word and applying that Word to our lives. We began some weeks ago with a challenge to embrace waiting. Then we considered embracing joy. Last week we talked about embracing trust. And today we want to reflect on embracing loss. Sue, what's our passage for today?
Well, it's a short one, just one verse, 1 Thessalonians 4:13. But we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are asleep, that you may not grieve as others do, who have no hope.
So our key word there is grieve or grief, a word that's being tossed around a lot these days as people are experiencing these days of incredible turmoil. It was in 1969 that a psychiatrist by the name of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross introduced what became known as the 5 stages of grief. And these things were actually based on her studies of those patients with terminal illness. But they have since then been applied in many, many different arenas of life to help people process the death of a loved one, certainly, but a broken marriage, or perhaps dreams and plans that have been interrupted in some significant way. Those are the 5 stages of grief.
So let me share those with you right now. The first one is denial. This can't be happening to me. Second is anger. Why is this happening? Who's to blame? The third is bargaining. Make this not happen and I will fill in the blank. The fourth one is depression. I'm too sad to do anything. And the last one is acceptance. I'm at peace with what has happened. So we have denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance.
I guess one of my greatest moments of grief was at the passing of my father some years ago. But as I reflect back on that experience, I've come to realize that I really didn't know how to grieve well. Both you and I come from good German stock, and we certainly accept that people have emotions and that grieving existed, but we always had this feeling that we need to be strong and we just need to move on after these events happen. In fact, as I reflect back on over 50 years that I knew my father, I can only remember him crying one time in all those years. And so I'll be honest with you, I can't really identify with these 5 stages of grief that Kubler-Ross talks about.
Mm-hmm. Well, she addresses that. She never intended these stages to be a rigid framework that is applied to every person and every loss. In fact, she wrote in her last book in 2004 that they were never meant to help tuck messy emotions into neat packages. They are responses to loss that many people have, but there is not a typical response to loss, as there is no typical loss. Our grieving is as individual as our lives.
Well, that's helpful to me as I process my own experiences, but I still wonder if grieving isn't a skill that we need to perfect, or isn't a muscle that we need to exercise more. And I think we're especially concerned about what might be an evangelical subculture in which we come to the point of believing that if my faith is strong enough, if I only believe what Jesus really said, that I should not be dealing with these emotions, I should be strong, I should be happy at every moment.
Yeah, I guess maybe that's what we most want to say today, that God gives us permission to grieve. And in fact, we really see this frequently in the Psalms, and I just would like to read a few of those Psalms for you. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. Psalm 73:26. And one more. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Psalm 147:3.
Well, and wasn't it Jesus himself who said, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. I think that brings us full circle back to our passage here in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. You were concerned when we first talked about it that it might be too raw, too emotional, because it is a passage that introduced the whole idea of death and the separation that comes through death. But we believe that in verse 13 we find principles that apply to many, many areas of our lives. That's where Paul says, I don't want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are asleep, that you may not grieve as others who have no hope. And what Paul is telling us here is the lack of good information about reality is going to cause us to experience grief no differently than the rest of the world. But if we know certain things to be true, we actually can reframe those experiences and live them in a very different way. And so you think about how he decides that death, this ultimate, or what feels from a human perspective to be this ultimate separation, should really be relabeled sleep. Because in biblical terms, it is a temporary separation, and one day we will be raised from the dead and will be rejoined together in God's presence. And so I love what Paul's saying there. As believers, let us know and affirm what God is saying is true, so therefore we can reframe even the most painful experiences, but it doesn't mean we're not going to grieve. He's simply saying, let's grieve differently. Let's grieve biblically. And we don't do that, therefore, as those who have no hope.
So let's remember that the day's coming when we will be in God's presence. And this is what it will be like. And I heard a voice, a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people. And God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away.
Wow, that must inform the way we grieve. There are so many reasons for grieving today. The loss or potential loss of loved ones who are fighting the illness, the interruption of our economic well-being, the job losses, which we know are great right now, the whole feeling of insecurity about the future. How about all the family plans or business or church plans that have been completely upended? And I think Paul here is giving us permission. It's okay to grieve these things, but we take a passage like that and it completely reframes the grief, because we believe in a God who really is in charge and who is working all things together for good, who is ordaining good works beforehand that we should walk in them today. So we really don't have to grieve like those who have no hope.